Hi everyone and welcome to the Xiong and Klaw Geek Out podcast. I am Xiong.
And I am Klaw.
And as always, we're here to geek out. On today's episode, we're going to talk about board games. Is there a terminology, Klaw, for it?
I'm not really sure. I guess New Age, but it, at this point goes back to like the 1970s, so...
So sit back and enjoy and let's geek out. Just a quick disclaimer, I'm not going to pretend that I know a lot about board games. It's more of a Klaw's expertise that I am slowly learning. I'm a noob in the world of board games. But I have come to, when you have the idea of board games, you think, right, okay, and you think of those board game clubs, like shops where everyone's gathered around a table.
Yeah, and I think that's probably one of the reasons that kind of wanted to talk about this now, is obviously now that COVID is, maybe looking like it's an end in sight and we're starting to be able to like go out and see friends and stuff, is that it is that whole thing of can finally actually get round a table with other people again and play board games.
And it's funny how much I've actually enjoyed board games. Yes, I know if people have seen my social media stuff, I've bragged about Heartless, about Kingdom Hearts, and how I love that game. But, we've played Star Wars and a zombie one and Dungeons. And
Here to Slay.
Here to Slay. Love Here to Slay. We need to play it again. But, it is weird how just like a board game that is completely different from, like I said before, Monopoly and Cludeo, you have that image of geeks as we are, but you think, oh, why are you sitting around playing a board game like that for? Because I think a lot of people think it's more like your typical Dungeons and Dragons type thing, and I think like I had that image of when you said about playing board games, it's like, oh, I don't really want to do this because it's going to be like 5+ hours long. It's going to be you reading from a book while I try to kill ogres. But it's not until we started playing different, like you started off with a small game,
yeah,
and then we've played Kingdom Hearts and
the Devil May Cry board game and all sorts. Yeah, and I think the other image a lot of people see is the whole like Ludo and Monopoly and things like that.
And I always pictured it as the it's called Risk, the army people.
Yep. I
always pictured it like that, where it's not like some of the board games we play. Yeah, there's cards. Sometimes there isn't cards. But in my head it was like Risk, where you had your figures. And it was all about, I know it's about winning, but you had to strategically plan how to win. But then as we've played different types of games, yeah, there is a bit of planning to it all, but not as I thought it was going to be.
Oh yeah, and I think the thing is there's such a breadth of different styles of games. Some are more kind of like puzzle-like, and others, are the strategy type things. But yeah, it's kind of a weird one, because obviously we said like New Age board games, in inverted commas, and like I was dismissing Monopoly. But in a way, well, not in a way, actually, Monopoly and Risk, as you said, are still kind of like the new wave of board games.
Yeah.
So I think kind of board games, like old board games, are seen as things like chess, backgammon, Ludo is still an old game. So they're kind of like a big thank you, I think, to kind of those games, MB games, all that kind of thing, that have made modern style board games possible. And then I think you have to look to sort of France and Germany, where there's a lot of games that kind of go back to the late 80s, early 90s. You've got Settlers of Catan, you've got Carcassonne, which were games that kind of got a popularity in kind of more of a to the side crowd, I guess. Yeah. People looking for something a little bit, not necessarily more, but a little bit different than like your MB style games that were very much aimed at kids and families, even though again a lot of the games are aimed at families, obviously. But yeah, so Carcassonne, Settlers of Catan, as I say, are sort of like ones that really kind of picked up a pace, and I think found that audience of people who were wanting to play board games more than just your, Saturday evening sat around the table with the family playing games type of thing.
I mean, I might go off subject here, but I remember there was one game me and my cousin played, and it was, I can't remember what it's called, but in my head it was a mixture of Cludeo and Mousetrap, where you were like in a mansion, you had your characters, so that's the Cludeo part.
Yeah.
And basically there was a murderer within, one of you was the murderer, but you had to move around the board, and with Mousetrap you had to set off the traps and whatever. It was kind of like that, you stood under if a character stood under a chandelier and you had the card or anything, you could literally drop the chandelier on her or him. And
oh, yes.
And I can't remember what it was called, and I know, and this is how old it is, I remember playing it on a Saturday night, because I swear to God we were in my auntie's living room playing it on her red carpet that she had at the time, my auntie and uncle, and I'm sure Noel's Edmonds' house party was on.
Yeah. Oh God, I know the game as well. I'm just trying to think of it now, because it was the same kind of time as when you had things like obviously Mousetrap, Scrabble Scramble.
Is that the one with the ball?
Yeah,
you had to get it through the little and
you had to push the button to move the bridges and
yeah.
flip it and things like that. Oh crumbs!
And the characters were like little plastic stands, and then they had a cartoonish style
cardboard thing.
I'm actually glad you know, because when I've mentioned this to people, they've just looked at me and gone, "Huh?"
Yeah, crumbs. What was that one called? Because some of those those, I guess 80s and 90s action board games, I want to say, where you've kind of got those kind of elaborate moving parts. There's been a few of them that have been remade. Again, struggling for names as per usual. But there's one where there's a volcano and you drop red marbles into the top of a volcano and it then goes down different paths and knocks people over and things like that. But yeah, that one I had completely forgotten about until you mentioned it.
Because I remember it took ages to set it all up, because obviously everything's got to be placed exactly, or it was like Buckaroo kind of thing where you miss the hook and it'll just drop.
Due to the wonders of editing and the internet, it actually turns out that we're both thinking of two very different games. Well, not very different games, but two different games.
No, I was thinking of one called 13 Dead End Drive.
And I was thinking of a slightly older game called Ghost Castle,
which I believe Claw has found on Amazon, an up-to-date version, which I think I've got a sneaky feeling he's going to order.
Oh, well, yeah, probably not. But no, I must say, I think it's Hasbro now have got the rights to all of the MB stuff, and they have actually reprinted a surprising amount. Yeah. But yeah, no, that's surprising that we kind of both thought we're thinking of the same thing, and actually it's the different stuff.
Down old memory lane.
Yeah, indeed. And we did, while we were looking around, sort of come across a couple of other board games that I'd completely forgotten about from my childhood, like the Pac-Man board game.
See, I never knew that one.
Oh, the Pac-Man board game was great. So you had the board was literally the shape of the Pac-Man map. And then you actually had little indents in it, so you could cover the whole thing in little marbles, pretty much the same as the Hungry Hippo white plastic marble things. So you covered it in those, and then you all had a different coloured Pac-Man, and it had some kind of rudimentary mechanism on it on the bottom that when you placed it over the top of the marble would pop into the body of the Pac-Man. Mm-hmm. So you'd go around the map gobbling up the marbles.
I get you, yeah.
And obviously had the ghosts going around to get in your way. I'm assuming you rolled a dice to move. I can't really remember the details. And then once it was full of marbles, well, not once it's full, once you cleared the board rather, or had however many turns it was, then you just sort of counted who had gobbled up the most marbles, and that's how you won the game.
Obviously, while we were looking for the names of the games we were talking about, I also thought of what was it called again? Sorry,
Atmosphere.
That I was telling you as soon as I mentioned it. I played it with my sister and my cousin and my aunties again, and for those who don't know what it is, basically, you can tell how old it is. You put a VHS in, and basically there's a character on there, and there was two different versions.
Oh, there was way more than that.
Yeah, the two one I remember is the one that the picture showed us, where he was just in
the hood, the original guy,
no, just makeup, original guy. Then the second one, which I preferred, he was the only way I can explain it is if you've ever seen Masters of the Universe film, with Courtney Coxon. He looked like Skeletor.
Okay.
And what happens is you play on the board, and he says, right, you got 5 minutes to move around, and you do whatever. I can't remember the gists, but you do whatever you do, and then he will come back on the screen, but he will shout as he comes on, like, silence or stop. And I remember one time we were playing it, and it scared the shit out of me so much that I ran upstairs to my auntie crying in fear. While you were talking about Pac-Man, the other one that came to my mind, which I know me and my sister loved, was, did you ever play Loopy Louie?
No.
So basically it wasn't really a board game. Basically it was like Hungry Hippos. You had your 4 little levers, and in the middle, and beside it you had 4, I think, discs with chickens on.
Yep.
And in the middle was an arm with an airplane with a Loopy Louie in it. And basically you turned it on, and basically you had to smack him away from your chickens. So if you missed him, he would hit one of your discs, and they would drop down and roll to him.
Okay.
And basically it was trying to protect your own chickens, but then trying to screw up the next player. So you could tap it really lightly enough so it moves over yours, but as it drops, it hits their chickens. And I remember playing it with my sister. Me and my sister used to smack it really hard to get each other. That was one I thought of, and God, I was obsessed with that game, the Loopy Louie.
Yeah, God, I mean, I think the thing is, a lot of the 80s, 90s, more kid-orientated board games were, I guess they existed because computer games were less of a thing.
Yeah.
So it's kind of ways of having these kind of elaborate, interactive kind of fun toys rather than...
I mean, when I say I love Loopy Loo, I did, but we played it mostly with my great auntie. When my nan and my mum were at work, my dad's at work, my great auntie looked after me, my sister and cousin, and I got excited then when you were talking. I'll tell everyone I've raised my hands in the air because I remembered it. 2 more games.
Ooh.
One I can't remember the name of, but if my father is listening, I'm hoping he'll know. All I remember is a board with a black tower in the middle, and the black tower had buttons on the bottom, and it spoke to you. And it was very like old-fashioned, the red like writing, when it's like dash 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 dash.
Was in like digital number display thing.
A lot of people tell me it's Dungeons and Dragons. I can't remember a single thing about it, apart from a board and this black plastic tower that you press the buttons and it just spoke to you.
Did you also drop marbles in the top of it?
Most possibly.
So I know there was one that got recreated fairly recently that was, I think, called Black Tower or something that.
I want to say on the board you had to go like from the outer rim and work your way basically into the tower. But don't quote me on that. Because I can't remember. And the one I got excited about with my arms up in the air was... which I find it weird that we're talking about board games and I mentioned Kingdom Hearts and Devil May Cry. My parents actually bought me a Batman Returns board game. Can I remember how to play it? Hell no. But you can tell how old it is because the figurines were actually iron and painted. And all I remember is, again, a board. And in the middle it was made out of cardboard, but it's, when you have to make it up, and it was like a triangle. And you had the penguin so far up, Catwoman so far up, and then I think you played as Batman. And that's about it. That's all I remember of that one. But I know you can still buy the Batman Returns one. If I could find it cheap enough, I would like the old version with the iron figurines, because I know obviously they don't do anything in iron anymore because it's bad for you, but back in the 90s it was fine to give it to kids.
Yeah, so I'm guessing that's not hidden up in a loft somewhere.
I'm hoping it is, if I'm honest. But if I'm honest, I remember having the Catwoman figure out of it.
It's one of those things. I am, however, imagining like a really long, impenetrable rule book, which is pretty much goes hand in hand with 90s board games. I think we've ended up with a bit of a memory lane of childhood board games. This is quite good because it's like quite a good bit of context, and quite interesting. So I guess kind of again in that period, obviously you then had things like the Hero Quest board game, which was more of a a Dungeons and Dragons-esque board game where you had like different missions and it was that more kind of role play element to it. So there's a lot of games from there which are kind of a start of like what I'd call modern board games. It's one of those weird ones. It's kind of this overlap of a lot of like the style of board games we play now existed in the 90s, but didn't have a huge amount of popularity outside of those more family orientated board games. As I said, ones I mentioned before, Carcassonne, Settlers of Catan were originally came out like late 80s, I think, but it wasn't until a bit later that they sort of really started to pick up and get people's interest. And I think kind of the big thing over the last, how long have we been playing board games now? I guess 15, 20 years that's kind of seen things really rise is, I think, people have slowly started kind of moving towards that social aspect of it. So kind of in more recent years you've had a lot of like board games clubs come along. When it's come to kind of like the retail space, you've got a lot more of like board game shops, but rather than it just being a shop to sell board games, they actually then have space that you can rent out to go and like sit and play games with friends, or they'll host special nights and things like that, which is kind of, I think, really kind of driven it into the forefront. So I think probably the big contributor of like the board game like clubs and things like that have like popped up over the last decade or so is that it's given people who are kind of interested in those games an opportunity to play them more. Because I think a lot of the things that maybe holds back the more in-depth and complicated board games is that half the time the rest of your family just aren't interested. So kind of if you have a lot of people who were interested in these things, if you happen to have a group of friends who played them, I mean, like I know I did sort of from like the early 2000s, and like had a group of friends and we'd always play lots of board games, and we started really sort of discovering all of these wonderful games that are out there rather than sort of like the stuff that everybody knows. So the fact that these started to become actual like organised groups and the shops that offer it as well sort of really helped people to discover the games and started to sort of pick sales up quite a bit. I don't think it was really any one game. I don't know if there's kind of like the social aspect of, we went through that period of everybody just sat home and watched TV and played video games and stuff, and then suddenly people go, oh, actually, once a week we can go out, we can sit around, actually talk to people, face to face, without having to go to the pub and play board games, which kind of just sort of saw this. I guess with anything that becomes popular, it kind of just hits that kind of critical mass. Mm-hmm. When suddenly there's enough people talking about it, you start pulling people in. Obviously, as much as I hate Facebook, Facebook and things like that have been quite useful to it, because it then meant that if you did have a club, you could put it on Facebook. People who live locally could then find you. So it's like the club that I belong to. It's like, I've made some really good friends who are literally people who were, they'd heard about board games, wanted to find out more about it, went Googling on Facebook and what have you, and Googling on Facebook, searching on Facebook, Jesus. And, they found our club, they came along, we're generally like a friendly bunch of people, which I guess is probably the other reason. The other thing that I love so much about it is, as much as I love online computer games and things like that, I think there is a certain, for want of a better word, kind of toxicity to like the computer games crowd. So, I think the people in the board games community are very welcoming and very friendly. So you'll go along to something and people will be like, yeah, sure, come and sit, join us. But again, it's kind of one of those weird things. I think board games definitely harbour a very sort of nice atmosphere. 99% of the time, I'm not to say there aren't sometimes arguments over rules, because it happens. But it's like I used to do a lot of like tabletop wargaming, so your Warhammer type games. And again, that you are face to face with each other, and generally people are quite nice. But you then go to a tournament or something like that, and you do then start getting that friction again that you get in some other sort of types of like sports and all that kind of things, where people start niggling over the rules, and people are there just to win. Whereas I think something that board games promotes like very strongly is, it's really not something where winning matters that much.
Yeah, because we've played games where we've had to question the rules at times because it is the rule isn't like perfectly clear what they're saying.
Yeah, and
it's up into interpretation. So it could be read like duh duh duh, and then a player could go, "Hang on a minute! It doesn't say I can't do this. It just says duh duh duh." But when you read the rule out again, you know what it's saying. But then when someone's questioning it, you are like, it is very vague what they mean, but they're going off like rules that are like a generic rule for different board games.
Yeah, I think definitely once you've been playing board games for a long time, it's almost like you get into that mindset of
what they mean,
presumed meanings, which maybe doesn't mean that probably means the rules are actually written quite poorly. But because, you've got that experience of other games, you know what the most likely intent of the rules is, I guess.
Yeah, and another example, I think we were playing the X-Files game, and I did something, I'm sure it was X-Files, and you were like, oh, you can't do that, and I had to question it myself.
Yeah. And
it's not until you read it out again that what I was doing was wrong. But it's one of those where, hang on, I think it's because some rules are very long-winded. Like, you can do this, but only if this is available, and if this is and this is, and then I think when you hear that one rule and it's like three lines long, when you come to play it, all you remember is you can use this to double the damage. But when you do it, it's like, oh no, yeah, you can activate her, but you need that symbol on another card, and that's what I questioned. I was like, that's not what I heard, and it's not until you reread it out that I was like, right, okay.
Yeah, and I think you also have to take probably a more abstract approach to things than, say, playing a computer game or even playing like Dungeons and Dragons. Because, even when a board game is very heavily themed, the rules are still aimed towards making it balanced and fair more than they are about fitting the theme necessarily.
Yeah.
So there will sometimes be things where the rule can feel, I guess, to some people who maybe haven't played as many board games, the rule will feel a little bit contrary to what the theme is.
Yeah.
So you'll be like, oh, but I'd be able to do this. It's like, yeah, but if you could do that, then the game would be broken and there'd be no point in playing it. But I think sort of theming in games is also important. So I've played like two games that I think functionally are almost identical to each other. I'm trying to remember the original version of it. It's Century Spice Road and another game called Century Golem. So they're both made by the same company. Century Spice Road is the original one, and the theming of it is very brown, shall we say. So it's the art style and everything of it is very akin to a lot of sort of European board games. And in the case, there's a lot of what get called like Euro games that are amazing games and got really kind of interesting like play to them. But for whatever reason, a lot of French and German games, for some bizarre reason, just go for this very kind of quite dull art style on them. So that's what Century Spice Road's like, and because it's quite a simplistic game, it's just not very exciting. Whereas they then released Century Golem, which is exactly the same game, but they gave it like nice shiny different coloured gems, and the artwork is these like really kind of like cartoony fantasy like big stone golem creatures, and it's just something about just having that nice kind of vibrant look to it because it's not an overly complicated game, it just really brings it to life.
So what you're saying is they remastered it?
Yeah. Oh, it's even weirder than that, because there's now, I think there's like 3 or 4 games in the Century Spice Road series where they kept on, because people did like Century Spice Road, as they do, and they've done like other it's not really expansions, they've kind of done other ideas along the same theme and evolved it, but then like I think it's normally like a year and a half, 2 years like after they release the Century whatever they call the most recent one, they then like a year and a half later release the Golem colourful version of it, and some people end up buying both because they like the games, and other people just wait for the Golem ones. So it's a bit of a bizarre one, that as an example, but yeah. I suppose to sort of finish the history lesson sort of side of things, I think the final piece in the puzzle of the explosion of board games is Kickstarter.
X-Men! That's what I've been waiting for.
So for anyone who hasn't heard of Kickstarter before, it's basically a crowdsourcing website. You go on there, you say, I've got this cool idea, will people give me money to try and make it? Now, what it initially allows you to do is give people, I guess, presents, rewards for donating certain amounts of money towards your project. But I think where it initially came into its own with board games is that, you could be, Joe Blogs, sat at home, you create a board game, you get your friends to play it a bit, so, you've already got a complete gaming concept. But you need to pay for artists, you need to pay for printing and all this kind of thing. So people could go on Kickstarter, actually show the game, maybe make the rules available to download as well, and then people could back it, and then they would get in on the first print run. These days, even big board games manufacturers, rather than taking the risk of printing off 100,000 copies of a board game and it not selling, they will pretty much go as far as creating all the artwork, doing your 3D renders of your board pieces and all this kind of thing. So you can literally go to Kickstarter, present a finished looking product, you've not printed any of it, and then literally you're saying everybody, hey look, pay up front. And then once we've got the money, we can go to the manufacturers and get them to print it all for us.
As you all heard, I shouted X-Men when Klaw mentioned Kickstarter. That is because I'm waiting very patiently.
I wouldn't say patiently, but
you're
waiting.
I'm waiting until September 2022 for an X-Men board game to come out, which is massively, massively very big in expansion packs and very, very, very dear, but totally worth it.
This is the thing. With the other thing with Kickstarter is they have a concept of stretch goals. So once a project's raised X amount of money, they might go, we'll throw in this bit extra. So the thing that gets a lot of people buying board games on Kickstarter is that 9 times out of 10 you back it for however much the main game's going to cost when it comes out in the shops. But because you're a backer, they then throw in expansions and extra exclusive models and cards and all these kind of things that just makes everybody go absolutely mental. It all gets very complicated. It also gets very expensive. And we do not look at how many board games I've backed in the last month because it's shocking.
Just to mention, there's a Witcher board game coming out, people. It looks amazing.
At the time of recording, the campaign was still running. If you're interested in finding out about board games in the comfort of your own home, it's an amazing website where you can just go and jump in and start playing board games with random strangers.
And that is how I started.
Which is how you started. And it's how the board game group I'm part of has managed to keep going throughout COVID, as we jump on a Discord video chat and we play board games on there as well as a couple of other services. So that's one really good way of getting to at least give yourself a flavour of board games if you've not played like the types of board games we're talking about before. So another little segue, because we're doing good at those today. Board games conventions. So again, these haven't happened for the last 2 years for obvious reasons, but another fun thing is the big board games conventions. In the UK, there's one which is like in the NEC. There's then more local ones. And the thing that's quite nice about the board games conventions versus, say, like Comic-Con or PAX and things like that for computer games, where you can just go and play some demos. With the board games conventions, you've got people there trying to demo you their new board games and give you a chance to have a 20-minute play, like intro game and all this kind of thing. But a big part of the board games conventions is they just make sure there's like huge hall space with loads of tables, a library of board games on a shelf, and you actually spend most of the weekend just sat playing board games with people. And again, I think that kind of goes back to that how friendly everybody is. That you even like at most of the conventions you can get like a little sign saying "looking for more." And you just kind of put it on your table and just like, within a few minutes somebody will probably be wandering around and be like, oh, I like the look of that game, can I join you? And you just meet new people that way, kind of even more so than you do just chatting to people randomly while you're queuing up to play a games demo at EGX, or you're at Comic-Con waiting for somebody to sign their photograph for you. But it's got to the point now where at like the really big conventions, even like YouTubers from America. So there's a YouTube channel I watch quite a bit of called the Dice Tower. But a bunch of them come over to the UK for the big UK Games Expo every year. The nice things with the board games is because it's often a board game isn't made by a huge team of people generally. There's a few kind of rare examples where it is a large team, but generally it's quite a small number of people. So the actual designers of these games will go to the conventions because they want to sell their game. I've actually spoken to people who have made these games. Whereas you go to a computer games convention and you've just got a bunch of people who are paid to run the demo stands who don't really care that much, to be honest, if they care at all.
That's I know we're talking about board games, but that's why I like Phil Spencer. Because when he comes on stage, if he does or doesn't feel passionate about what he's talking about, he gives the impression he is passionate about what he's talking about. And it's not over the top, eye bulging, why have I got in store? He's like, hi guys. He's very nice, calm.
Yeah, he's a very, very good public speaker.
If Phil Spencer ever turned around and made a board game of the Xbox, and came to one of the board game conventions, like, hi, I'm Phil Spencer, I've come to sell you a board game. I'll be like, don't care what it is, just give me the money. Yeah, I'll give you the money. No, don't get me wrong, I don't like Phil Spencer in that way. It's just Phil Spencer. There's just something about Phil Spencer. When he talks, you're just like, yep, sure, here's my money.
Phil Spencer.
What did I just say? Phil Spencer.
Yeah, exactly, Phil Spencer.
Yeah, Phil Spencer. You're saying it like I'm saying it wrong.
No, I'm saying it like you're saying it every other word.
Phil Spencer. We are not sponsored by Phil Spencer or Microsoft.
For anybody who's, kind of got interested in board games from what we've babbled on about, might have happened, you never know. I will quickly kind of go through a few kind of good starting points and a few maybe other recommendations for people who are already in board games. So starting with what generally get referred to as gateway games. Board games aren't at all addictive or being pushed at all, honest governor. So gateway games, so as I mentioned, Settlers of Catan is a fantastic game. It's how do you describe Settlers of Catan? I can't right now. Go check it out. Carcassonne is another great game that falls into the tile laying kind of genre of board games. That's the thing. Bit like you've got your first-person shooters and your RPGs and all this kind of thing. You get the same thing in board games, of course. So yeah, Carcassonne is a relatively simple tile-laying game where you're sort of trying to build roads and castles, and you're sort of pulling random tiles and having to line them up a bit into like a jigsaw puzzle. But you're doing it not collaboratively. You're doing it and taking it in turns. So you're trying to screw the other players over. Yes, thank you very much for that. Unstable Unicorns is another good gateway game at this point. I think it has now superseded Munchkin, which is another game people may have heard of. So I could highly recommend Unstable Unicorns. It's just a very silly card game. We play a game by the same company, which we've already mentioned, which is Here to Slay. Which is a very similar game, just with a few extra elements added to it.
And it's so much better.
So I would say, yeah, Here to Slay is better than Unstable Unicorns, but if you're really just starting out, then Unstable Unicorns is quite a good starting point. And then another kind of, again, it's probably a bit of an old one at this point, but I'm kind of starting with kind of like the old classics. It's a game called Stone Age, which is a worker placement game. I hope everyone's taking notes here. Which is quite fun. You have a bunch of your little tribesmen, and you're placing them around the board to gather resources, make farmland. You put 2 of them next to a hut when you want to get an extra bonus person added to your pool of people, which often gets referred to as the shagging hut. And it's probably one of the I don't know if it's necessarily the first, but it's one of the earlier worker placement games, but even now is a very good introduction to that kind of style of gameplay, and I highly recommend it. Moving on to my second section, which is what I've entitled Modern Classics. Zombicide is hugely popular, to the point that it has spawned 2 or 3 different themed games alongside also a load of expansions. Sort of offshoots of Zombicide is Black Plague, which is the version of the game I have because it's more fantasy themed. But the general gist of all the Zombicide games is everybody has a character. You have a bunch, rather than having a board, you have a bunch of tiles which give you kind of like different sized rooms and stuff. So each time you play, you look up a campaign mission in the book, and it tells you how to lay out the tiles, and then you send your characters in. You get zombies swarming at you while you're trying to either escape or find keys. One we've already mentioned, Legendary, which the base game is themed around Marvel. I forgot my board game genres bingo. So Zombicide, for anyone who is interested, I'm getting really weird looks here, gets referred to as a dungeon crawler.
Oh, okay.
There we go. So Legendary is what gets referred to as a deck builder game. So with anyone familiar with games like Magic the Gathering or Yu-Gi-Oh! Or the Pokemon trading card game, obviously with those you're having to buy little packs of cards and collect them up to be able to build your decks. Whereas somebody came up with the genius idea of, rather than doing all of that, why not just release a box with a whole stack of cards in it, and part of the game itself is building and developing your deck of cards. So probably the pioneer to deck building games was a game called Dominion, which I love. However, a lot of games have come along and probably done it better. I'm not sure that Legendary necessarily does it better, but I think Legendary is a better introduction to deck building games. The main Legendary game being themed around Marvel characters. So you have your deck building element where you're kind of trying to recruit heroes into your deck of cards to beat a row of villains that come out of another deck of cards. So that is a lot of fun, and if you like that, they then do a whole bunch of games which are then... Whereas Legendary, the core game, is kind of half cooperative, half competitive, they've then gone and done a load of other games which are 100% cooperative. So it's all about just beating the game as a group. So you've got X-Files, they've done Predator, they've done Alien, I think they've done Buffy. One of the last of my modern classics, I don't know if it's quite as popular at the moment for obvious reasons, as you'll know when I say the name, but it's a game called Pandemic, which is another cooperative game where you are literally flying around the world trying to stop 4 virus outbreaks. Pandemic has spawned 1,000,001 offshoots. I think they've released a new title in the series almost every year or every other year, and they've done all kinds of weird things. So even though they're all called Pandemic, they're not all necessarily pandemics. So like the last themed one I played was based around the dikes in, I want to say Norway. I've probably got the wrong country. We're talking about as in like water dikes.
Do you know what you mean?
Cool. Okay. I'm glad you're just looking at me.
I didn't. I was looking at you weirdly because of what you said.
So that one, rather than you're trying to stop the spread of viruses, you're trying to keep water levels down and like the right areas blocked off. But I think the key thing with a lot of co-op games, and Pandemic's probably like the first big example of them, is like everyone has a different character, so you all have to kind of work together and go, oh, so and so needs to go here so they can use their special ability to do that, and all this kind of thing. So some quick recommendations which we will come back to at a later date to talk about in more detail. Some of my favourite games, a game called Isle of Cats, tile laying game, back to your little notebooks, but it's more, I guess the best way of describing it is it's kind of tile laying with Tetris like tiles.
Yep.
So the theme of the game is there's this island full of mystical cats that's sinking, and you have to rescue all the cats onto your boat. Quacks of Quedlingberg. Good luck googling it because you probably won't be able to spell it, but there we go. Which is a potion making game.
Oh yes.
It's actually quite a quick little what get referred to as push your luck game.
Mm-hmm. Very much so.
In this one, you have a bag full of potion ingredients, and you are drawing them out to add to your potion. And if you draw out too many of a particular ingredient, your potion explodes in your face.
It was. You either had to stop at 7. If you go over 7, your potion explodes.
Another favourite game of mine that I need to teach Zong is a game called Heart of Crown, which is back to our deck building games.
That's the anime looking one, isn't it?
Yes, it's anime themed, where you get to be a pretty anime princess.
I mean, that's everybody's dream, isn't it?
Yeah. And for me, it's basically a revamp of Dominion that I mentioned earlier, but done, I don't know, there's somehow they managed to take the basics of Dominion and just kind of tweak it that bit to make it better, and also somehow fit it into a box about a quarter the size. I'm not entirely sure how this happened, but they've just jammed all the cards into a nice little neat package, whereas Dominion, if you collected all the expansions, you ended up with like an entire shelf full of Dominion boxes. Devil May Cry board game. Zong, I'm not sure Zong's as keen on it as I am.
No, I am. I remember the first time you and Demi were playing it, because Devil May Cry is not the type of game I want to play, as in computer game.
Yeah.
And I carried on playing whatever I was doing on my PC or Xbox, and I kept on turning around and seeing your pieces, and what actually got me interested in it it wasn't the figurines of the heroes you play, it was the demons and the bosses.
Yeah.
And then the next time you two played it, you asked if I wanted to join. I went, oh, go on then. I was like, this is not going to be my cup of tea. I'm not going to enjoy this. And I fucking love it.
So the general idea of the game is you're one of the characters from Devil May Cry. You're essentially in a combat arena. Monsters are spawning around you, and you use cards to create combo moves to then beat up the monsters. And you actually score points for flair, like you do in Devil May Cry with the rating system. So the more cards you use, the more flair you've given to your attacks, and the more points you get. The score track is then split up into your D rating, C rating, B rating, A rating, S, double S, triple S, as you have in the Devil May Cry games. And they actually use that in the game quite cleverly, in that if you die, rather than you just being out of the game, which in a game that takes a couple of hours to play is kind of dull if you die halfway through. Yeah. But if you die, you just drop back points to the rank below the rank you're in at the moment. The last of my recommendations, again, something that you've not played yet, isn't really a singular game but a series of games. So there's a load of games called Tiny Epic something. So there's Tiny Epic Galaxies, Tiny Epic Zombies, Tiny Epic Quest. And part of the point of these games is that they fit in a very small box. I think it's like a 6-inch by 3-inch box. So that it's very compact, so it's the type of game that you can just throw in your bag, take around a friend's house or whatever. Very, very kind of portable. And obviously inside the pieces are quite small. It's like little wooden pieces and stuff, so it's nothing elaborate in that sense. But they are still full games in that little box. And some of them are also brilliant little games. I love them to bits. Every time a new Tiny Epic game goes on to Kickstarter, people go absolutely berserk for them because, they look adorable, and as I said, when you've got all of these like massive games like Devil May Cry, that trying to transport them from place to place is a bit of a pain in the neck, especially if you don't have a car. The Tiny Epic games are there for you, basically, in that you can grab like 3 or 4 of them, chuck them in a backpack, and away you go down your mate's house, have a drink, play some games. And as I said, they are, as rules wise and game wise, as good as any big box game out there, really. Zong, do you have any of the games you have played that you wanted to recommend?
Yes, I would say if you are a fan of... Well, you don't have to be a fan of Kingdom Hearts, but it would help, I would say. But no, you got me the Kingdom Hearts game, and I was excited to the point where I actually bought card covers for a game. Don't want greasy fingers all over my cards. No, it is great. Basically, if you don't know the gist of Kingdom Hearts, it's Kingdom Hearts. You play as one of the main characters from the game. Too many to explain who they are and what they do. And basically, the gist of the thing is there's the outer square, then the middle, then it's inner, then it's central. Yeah. So basically, you travel around the outer worlds, which are all mixed up of Disney worlds, because obviously it's part of Disney. And you need to find a way to transport yourself through the corridor of darkness to basically move inwards into the board. And before you get to the door of darkness, you need to somehow get hold of a Keyblade. Those people who have no idea what Kingdom Hearts is, this makes no sense to you, but those who do, you understand where I'm going. And it may sound simple, but along the way you do bump into Maleficent, Jafar, and even though I know a lot of people love him, Jiminy Cricket in the game.
Mm.
You want to backslap him. And obviously, like the first game, you can collect all the Dalmatians and drop them off at Travis Town to the mom and dad. It is really fun, and there is extra stuff there for you. But that's Kingdom Hearts. Obviously, we've mentioned X-Files Legendary that I love. Here to Slay. X-Men.
What, the one that we're waiting for?
Yeah.
I mean, we can't really recommend it now, can we?
No, but I'm looking forward to it. The Witcher.
Oh, yes. It's looking good. That is literally, as we speak, is still on Kickstarter. Probably won't be by the time people are listening to this.
I'm trying to think of other ones. We played Star Wars.
That's Star Wars Outer Rim.
Thank you. I couldn't think of it.
There are quite a lot of Star Wars board games.
Yeah, I couldn't think of what it's called. I quite enjoyed that one. I got frustrated to the end just because I kept on losing. No, I just kept on not winning my missions. I like that one. I'm just trying to think of any others I've played. Oh, and I like that Cludeo one, where you're the sidekick and you have to find out who killed who the witnesses were.
Mysterium. So
yes.
we played Mysterium Park, which is the... I'm not sure cut down version's quite the right word. They've kind of... It's almost like a revamp where they've kind of looked at... So Mysterium, which I also do have, which I love. It's an amazing game. Again, yeah, it's basically Cluedo with pictures.
Yes.
So you have to use these abstract art pictures to give people clues towards the location or the victim or the murder weapon. And the original Mysterium is fantastic, but the setup is quite long-winded. So Mysterium Park, which is actually the game I think I'd recommend to people to go to start with.
Yeah, I would.
They've kind of come up with a few systems that just make it a lot quicker to get going and a lot quicker to set up. And the nice thing is all the cards and everything are the same sizes. They are different card backs, so you couldn't mix the cards from the two games, but you could quite happily use the cards from Mysterium and its expansions with the Mysterium Park rule set. Good little tip there.
Dark Souls, I do want to try, but then when I hear how long-winded and how very much like Dark Souls it is, it kind of puts me off.
So yeah, so on a closing note, a small word of warning when it comes to board games, especially when you're getting them from Kickstarter, is look at... Well, again, you can't do this if it's on Kickstarter, because generally speaking, not very many people have played the game by the time you're buying it, but... a lot of games will say how long the game takes on the box. I would say go online, have a bit of a Google, Board Game Geek, yes, BGG, BoardGameGeek.com, or there's a few other websites which have like board game databases and like forums and all the rest of it. You know, if you don't know somebody who's recommending the game and you're just looking at something for yourself, do not trust the playtime on the box. Look it up, see what other people who have played the game reckon how long the game takes.
So guys, like Claw said earlier, this is one of the longest episodes we've done, but...
We'll see how short we manage to cut it down to.
Yes, and you know, if it is over our usual, it's going to stay over our usual. I'm not going to cut loads out for the sake of it.
No.
Like I said, we've missed like 2 weeks worth. We've obviously up and left Podbean and moved it all to YouTube.
Yep.
So, you know, it's worth it, and, you know, it's a topic that we've really enjoyed talking about.
Absolutely.
And like Claw said earlier on as well, E3.
E3!
So, obviously, let me just look at the calendar. And that starts on June the 10th all the way to the 13th. So, obviously, on the 19th of June, I have a 24-hour stream charity event for Macmillan nurses.
Yep.
But at the moment, we have got a few plans, but you can guarantee there's going to be a community evening.
Yeah.
Community evening Among Us, What the Dub, maybe Overwatch, you know, things like that where everyone can take part. In the evening, towards the late evening, good old South Claw here is going to take over for me.
Yep.
For a few hours, so I can get some food, put my facial cream on and go to sleep, look pretty when I come back at midnight. And then from midnight, there we will be playing a horror game that you lot have voted for on Discord.
Yeah, and it's also going to feature me and Zong racing each other in a game.
Yes.
Think we're probably looking at Doom, but we may change our mind before that. Need to find time to practice.
Yeah. So with that, it's either whoever gets through the game quickest, or who gets at the end of the timer, because we're going to set a time limit, because we could be doing it all night. Whoever, like, say, after 5 hours, for example, who's got the furthest.
Yep.
And Southclaw has been challenged to, if he plays Minesweep, is it? On the hardest level and doesn't trip a mine, one of my followers will double their donation that they gave last year for this same cause.
Yeah. Joke's on him.
And then I want to sort of throw in, well, if I do it as well, you'll have to triple it. But I'm no good at Minesweep at all.
I used to play way too much Minesweep, which he didn't know when he made that bet.
No, he didn't.
Whether I'm any good anymore is a different matter. Though.
So, guys, that is what's coming up in June, basically. And then, obviously, we'll try and fit a podcast in before the stream. I hope you do enjoy this. Obviously, it's always a goodbye from me, Zong.
And goodbye from me, Claw. And as ever, Phil Spencer.
Phil Spencer, geeky.